The latest Brexit news now. The British government says it will establish a new civil service unit to manage the UK's departure from the European Union. The decision came during a cabinet meeting. It is the first British Prime Minister David Cameron has held since the country's decision to leave the European Union. Cameron has announced he'll be stepping down by October. Former London Mayor Boris Johnson, who led the Leave campaign, is one of the frontrunners to succeed him. Well, let's look at other factors in the Brexit aftermath. European leaders are set to meet on Tuesday to discuss the way forward following the Brexit vote. Meanwhile, British Prime Minister David Cameron gathered his cabinet to deal with the impact on the economy. Chancellor of the Exchequer George Osborne has tried to reassure financial markets that the UK's economy is strong, while opposition Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn is under mounting pressure from Rebel MPs to stand down. Now, European Parliament Chief Martin Schulz has warned that a period of limbo will only lead to more insecurity. And German Chancellor Angela Merkel has pointed out that international markets are concerned that the EU is no longer governable. She's called on leaders from France, Italy and the European Council to discuss ways to secure EU unity. The Brexit vote wiped $2.1 trillion from global equity markets on Friday, and the British pound sank to a 30-year low. Well, let's bring you more now on that EU leadership meeting set to take place on Tuesday. I'm joined live from Brussels by CCTV's Kate Parkinson. Kate, of course, we saw the UK today, or at least UK leadership, working really hard to try and stabilize international markets. One imagines that this meeting of EU leadership tomorrow will be seeking to do the same.
Well, the priority certainly here in Brussels tomorrow will be to try and establish a unified response to the Brexit. There will be all 28 heads of state here in the Belgian capital. That does include the British Prime Minister David Cameron, and he will be given an opportunity to brief his peers on the results of the UK referendum, but we do know that he will not be triggering Article 50 of the Lisbon Treaty. This is an article we've been hearing a lot about lately. It's the so-called divorce clause written into the agreement on the EU constitution, which will allow the UK to exit the Union. Now, this is causing a lot of frustration here in Brussels and across the European Union, and that's because there is very serious concern that a period of prolonged uncertainty could damage the unity of the European Union as well as the economy of the European Union. We've seen crisis talks taking place ever since the referendum results were announced. So, for example, today in Berlin, the German Chancellor Angela Merkel held talks with the French President François Hollande and the Italian Prime Minister Matteo Renzi. Now, they made a statement in the past hour and they said that there will be no talks on the Brexit, formal or informal, until the UK triggers this exit procedure. And this is very much a strategy to try and make sure that this does not drag on for any longer than necessary. We do know that it's not going to start until the UK has a new Prime Minister. David Cameron has already made that clear. We found out today that the UK should have a new leader in place by September the 2nd. Certainly EU leaders will be hoping that that is the moment that the UK then triggers this exit clause and they can really get down to the very difficult negotiations on the UK's exit from the EU.
Well, of course, when the news was announced last week, it seemed that the EU was a little unprepared for what was to come, and many still questioning what the EU will look like in the future and what is next for now the 27-member bloc. Are we any closer to answering some of those questions, Kate?
Well, to be blunt, not really. There is still a lot of uncertainty over the future of the European Union, and you're entirely right when you say nobody really expected this. Certainly nobody really wanted it, and so it did feel like they were somewhat caught off guard when this shock result was announced from the UK referendum. So really, and actually this will be very much the focus of the second day of talks here in Brussels on Wednesday, which I should point out the UK will not be attending. So when the 27 heads of state of the remaining EU countries sit down on Wednesday, the focus of their talks will really be on the future of the Union and a reflection on where it all went wrong and how to prevent a further disintegration. The United Kingdom is not the only country in Europe where Euroscepticism has been on the rise. There are other countries that, since the results of the UK referendum were announced, we've seen populist parties calling for in-out referendums, for example in France and the Netherlands, among others. So this is very much going to be the focus of the second day of the talks here in Brussels, to try and keep the rest of the Union united.
All right, we'll of course keep a close eye on developments there in Brussels. Kate Parkinson live for us from Belgium. And of course these meetings are taking place, as Kate says, to prepare for that eventual split of the UK from the EU. Now CCTV's Jack Barton takes a closer look at the nuts and bolts of saying goodbye to Brussels.
Britain's Prime Minister David Cameron says he will step down within a few months, leaving it to the country's next leader to begin divorce proceedings with the EU, despite pleas from Brussels to get on with it. Under the rules of the bloc's Lisbon Treaty, a breakup would be negotiated over 2 years. Some member states want to punish the UK to discourage others from leaving. Anti-EU sentiment is higher in France than the UK, so Paris is particularly keen to stop any chance of a Frexit referendum at home. But Germany may seek to help Britain retain some of its privileges at this week's Leaders' Summit.
We will sit together as 27 and see if it's tenable from our point of view and according to our interests. And there is absolutely no reason to handle this without being sensible.
The issue of passporting will need to be sorted out. That's the official term for the free movement of money across the EU. 40% of London's key financial sector deals with cross-border trade to the tune of about $27 billion a year. But the real headache begins when EU laws no longer apply.
Thousands of pieces of legislation currently covered by the EU on everything from trade to food safety will now have to be rewritten back at Westminster.
Then there's the variables, like Scotland's wish to remain in the EU.
A second independence referendum is clearly an option that requires to be on the table, and it is very much on the table.
In the end, Britain may find it's not only dealing with the legal, economic and political headaches of a Brexit, but also the breakup of the United Kingdom. Jack Barton, CCTV, London.